You know, it's funny. I start setting up and I start going, okay, I'm going to do like a look at franchises and whatnot. And then I got into TV ratings. And you know, this is where things get kind of contentious between the Americans and the Canadians. So I apologize at the beginning of this if the comment section at all turns into that, because that's not what I'm trying to do. The NHL has a problem, and the NHL won't admit it has a problem. And I just started looking at ratings, and here's the amazing thing. In Canada, the final game, Game 7 between Winnipeg and Nashville, drew 13.7 million Canadian viewers. That's more than a third of Canada watched that game. The finale of Vegas and San Jose, 11.4 million. Canada is fascinated with Vegas as well. 10 million watched Tampa Bay and Boston. 9.4 million watched Pittsburgh and Washington. So the question then becomes, okay, are fans just tired of watching Pittsburgh? I think they were. Now, you look on the American side of things, and I'll talk about the regular season first. The NBC Sports Network, 417,000 viewers average per game, which is off 12% from last year. NBC, the parent network, 1.29 million viewers per game, which is up 4% from last year's all-time low of 1.25 million. The first two games of Winnipeg and Vegas have been watched by 1.841 million by an article I was reading going into Game 3. So, according to them, that is the most watched Western Conference final that doesn't feature the Chicago Blackhawks. And it's up 70% over the viewership of last year's Western Conference final between Anaheim and Nashville. It's always been, as I said, it's always been this bone of contention between Canadians and Americans that it is the Canadian game. And then it's this weird, bizarro world we live in where the ratings are so much higher in Canada than in the States. And yet there's the pursuit of the American dollar. And yet the other upsetting part of this for the NHL is they're losing more ground in the NBA. The NBA's ratings this year went up, while the NHL's went down. So that's an issue. And yet, when Gary Bettman was asked about it, he said, there's no problem here. There's nothing to see here. No, the ratings are fine. And he pointed out that some of the big market teams were down and weren't doing very well this year, so that explains the ratings drop. And all I could think reading this was, do ratings drop in Canada when Toronto isn't any good? A little bit. Not a ton, though. Although they definitely go up when Toronto's good. But it's this strange situation, and yet when you look at the ratings, and I looked at a couple of different charts, the number one for ratings in the playoffs, the number one market, is Buffalo. Fans in Buffalo are watching hockey. A lot of fans in Buffalo are watching hockey. They don't have a team in the race, but they're watching hockey. So even though didn't make the playoffs, they're watching their hockey. And yet, you get the feeling that Buffalo, when you look at teams in the American 48 states down there, that they might be the least respected by the league because it's a smaller market than some. And this is where it gets difficult. So I don't believe that there's actual fixing that goes on with hockey, because it's counterproductive to the entire league to do that. Because you've got players, you've got referees, you've got coaches, you've got owners who would call them out on it if it was there. But there are favored teams. There are locations that the league definitely favors. Now, the Vegas storyline is good, and I'm not taking anything away from that, and it's definitely going to help ratings in the States. But when you look at 11 million viewers in Canada watching Vegas and San Jose, and then they're talking about Vegas and Winnipeg drawing 1.8 million in the States, and Canada's got 10% of the population of the U.S., and it is that annual argument that we should have more teams in Canada and less teams in the States, and you got all these markets that aren't going to buy into it. And it is tough. I think part of it is trying to break in this sport to people who haven't watched it before. I think the crew that they employ to do this, I don't think it's a very solid crew for attracting new viewers or casual viewers. I think that NBC needs to go back to the drawing board when you look at their coverage, and you look at the NHL Network too. There's some of their analysts and some of the people that are on there that you watch and you listen and you go, these guys aren't even watching. The NHL app on my phone, they're talking about the draft. And they're saying, okay, well, who's going to go where in the draft? And one of the writers for NHL.com said that they believe Montreal's going to draft Brady Tkachuk because they need a big tough winger to play with the number one center, Jonathan Drouin. And I thought, you didn't watch Montreal at all this year. Because the whole storyline of Montreal was that Jonathan Drouin did not make it as the number one center. And by the end of the year, they were scrambling to figure out where everybody was going to play in the lineup. And the idea is that going forward, they likely won't be they won't be looking at it as Drouin being the number one center. They need to bring in a number one center, which is why a lot of Montreal fans are, really jazzed about the idea of John Tavares coming in, because if Tavares comes in, you can bump Drouin down to the number two line, and you don't know what's going to happen from there. And I admit that is an intriguing storyline. But when you've got guys who are on the NHL's website and they're doing a mock draft, and it just I read that and I'm like, okay, and it's one of those moments where you hear something they say, or you see something and you go, I don't know that I can trust your opinion. And I know I've had those moments on this channel where people have said that about me. And I've answered them. And whenever I see them, I do my best to answer them. And I answer them with honest opinion, and if I'm wrong on something, I admit it. And there are times where I've watched broadcasts and I've listened to things said by whether it's Jeremy Roenick or it's Mike Milbury or whoever. Almost anybody that's on these, and you'll hear something and you go, wait, no. And we give a lot of flack to the Canadian announcers we have up here, and rightfully so. Paul Romanuk, some of his announcing, you scratch your head and go, what did he just say? Jim Hewson seems to have picked up the ball from Bob Cole with mispronouncing names this playoffs, and I'm not sure that we needed somebody to pick up that mantle, but he's done it, because you hear him pronounce names and you think, didn't they go over this before the game? Bob Cole would approach players before games and ask them, how do I say your name? You walk right up to them and say it. And that is to be respected. Now, he might forget that name during the game, but when he got the name right, he would pronounce it right. For the most part. It's just, to me, it feels like what's going on in the States is that the NHL doesn't have the deal with ESPN they need. The NBA has that. NBA playoffs take place at the same time as NHL, so Americans have to decide, am I going to watch basketball? Am I going to watch hockey? Basketball does a tremendous job building up the stars of the game. Hockey does not. Hockey does a terrible job of building up the stars of the game. They show Sidney Crosby 24/7, but really they should be talking about all of the stars of the game and building up as many stars as possible, so that for a casual viewer who may be deciding, do I want to watch the NBA semifinals or do I want to watch the NHL semifinals, might go, hey, there's this really intriguing storyline going on here, and on the other side it's kind of the same teams as always. And it's funny to me because the NBA has that, where I look at the playoffs and I look at who's in the Final Four, who's in the finals, I go, same thing. Wake me up when somebody new gets in there. And that should be hurting them, and it doesn't. So the NBA does a great job marketing itself, marketing a game where guys can score 110, 120 points as a team, and there's no real, to me, there's no real tension until maybe 2 minutes left in the game. The rest of the game, you're just sort of looking at your watch like, all right, well, it's 65-58, it's 65-60, it's 65-62, it's 67-60, it's 69. Was that a 3? Oh, that was a 3. And it just, to me, it feels like it just keeps going. So, to me, hockey is a more exciting sport. To me, it's easier to watch. But the NHL does a bad job marketing it. So I don't look at those numbers and point the finger at Americans. I point the finger at the NHL and the deals they make. And the fact that It just feels like the networks that are carrying it, they seem to want a loud presence on the screen and a guy who's going to say a lot of crazy crap, rather than somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. And the example I use from Canada again is Kelly Rudy. Kelly Rudy very, very rarely raises his voice. And when there's a panel, Kelly Rudy will usually be the one who's listening, and then he'll give his opinion. And he's very well spoken, and he's very knowledgeable about the game. And I don't see that with American broadcasts when I watch them as much. Now, some of the Fox Sports, I will give full credit to Fox Sports for the fact that their regional telecasts, they seem to have the right guys in the right spots most of the time. There are times I'll watch a Fox broadcast and say, wow, this is just stupid. But most of the announce crews that Fox Sports has are pretty darn good. And I can't understand, for the life of me, why Fox Sports gets most of it right and NBC just, they go with the loud. It just seems like they go with the loud guys. Which, in Canada, we have Don Cherry, he's loud, but we have everything else to offset it. Nick Kyprios can be kind of loud too, but Nick Kyprios is insightful a lot of the time too. So if you can get past some of the brash, cocky, and some of the ego that's in there, which is pretty normal for a guy who's an enforcer in the NHL, I would imagine. You kind of have to have a bit of an ego to be willing to fight guys every night. And Kipper was a good fighter in his day. He still has insight. He still has inside sources, and he doesn't talk about games and lead me to believe that he hasn't actually watched it. And there are times where I watch an American broadcast because, having the NHL Center Ice package, I watch both Canadian and American broadcasts. There are times where I'll watch an NBC broadcast and be like, did you even watch the game? So I think the NHL has a lot of work to do, and part of the problem is that when Bettman goes out and he's talking to the media about this, all he does is make excuses for why ratings are down, why the league isn't getting more popularity, and maybe the Vegas storyline will help increase the league's profile. The thing is, it'll increase the profile of Golden Knights and nobody else. It won't benefit the rest of the league. This will only benefit the new expansion teams. So they really need an approach that will benefit all 31 teams, soon to be 32. And it's weird because, again, in Canada, the ratings are through the roof. And what we get told is, yes, the ratings are through the roof, but in terms of actually putting another team in Canada, it's an economic, it's a challenge. It's a challenge? You get 1.8 million households in the States, a country of 300 million people. You get 13 million Canadians watching out of a country of 30-some million people. And it's a challenge to get enough Canadians to warrant putting a team there. This is why people get angry, and I understand it. I understand the league's point of view, and I understand the point of view of Canadians. And sadly, the issue I take with it is this. We shouldn't get mad at American hockey fans. We should just ask ourselves why the league doesn't create more of them, because it is the best game on earth. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. One thing that's raised by the article is whether or not the fact that the NHL didn't go to the Olympics hurt their ratings after the Olympics or during the Olympics. Because, of course, during the Olympics you're going to hear more about players, more about athletes, and if you know you can watch them in NHL games after the Olympics are over, you might be more likely to watch the NHL. And this is something that the NHL has said that doesn't happen and that's not a thing. I do question that, though. That does sound like something that probably works. I know when I watch the Olympics, there are athletes that I'll see in sports that I'll watch and I'll go, wow, that's awesome. And I might be more likely to watch the next X Games where that's on. I might be more likely to watch that when it's on CBC or some other network where they have some kind of a Winter Games thing, and I go, oh, that's that sport I like. The downhill snowboarding with the huge ramps and all that. That's freaking amazing. So without the Olympics, I don't discover that, and without those Olympians, I don't know who they are when I watch it then on TSN or Sportsnet after. So I do think there's something to that, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, and I promise I'm going to do something with this, but the ratings thing came up, and it's something that's really curious as we go through the playoffs, that Canadian ratings are way up and American ratings really aren't. And these playoffs have been awesome. So let me know what you guys think. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I'll talk to you guys again soon.